In other news, Singapore workers are among the most disengaged in the region and globally, and younger employees seem to be feeling it the most. This is according to an inaugural study by the Singapore Institute of Directors and workplace consultancy Gallup. Of about 1,000 workers polled, only 14% felt engaged at work. That's below the global average of 20% and Southeast Asia's 25%. Now, there's also a generational divide. Workers under 35 report lower levels of engagement than their older colleagues, with a 6 percentage point gap. More than half report daily stress, compared with 37% of those aged 35 and above. Managers were identified as the greatest driver of employee engagement, but the report found that investment and support to build their capabilities was lacking.
When we look at engagement, it is not a prioritization problem. Leaders know it's important, but it's an execution challenge where it's not translating into the performance for the organization today.
In all, the report finds that these disengaged workers cost the country's economy over 75 billion Singapore dollars in lost productivity. Analysts say that organizations need to build their employee value proposition, or EVP, to continue engaging workers.
Organizations that have crafted a very clear EVP that showcases what exactly are the different programs employees can stand to receive, they are more likely to have an engaged workforce. They are also more likely to have a stronger commitment towards well-being programs that are being implemented and developed by the organization.
Speaking at the launch of the report, Minister of State for Manpower Dinesh Vasudash says companies need to treat people as a strategic priority.
Reframing human capital as a strategic issue requires leadership at the highest level. When human capital is treated with the same rigor and discipline as financial capital, for example, organizations make better decisions about their people, and these better decisions then translate directly into better long-term performance.
We're committed to building engaged and inclusive workplaces of the future, and we're doing so by partnering with institutions to launch training programs for strategic human capital at the board level. We're also supporting key government initiatives and getting boards ready for the Workplace Fairness Act that will be implemented next year.
And for more on the Singapore workplace, we speak with Jon Clifton, who is CEO of Gallup. Jon, welcome to the show.
Angela, thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with this. In your report, you describe disengagement as a strategic liability. First of all, what do you define as disengagement, and why is it a strategic liability?
Well, let's start with what engagement is. What it is that we're trying to capture in the workplace is what is somebody's emotional attachment to work? How much spirit do they bring every single day that they come to the office? Because we see somebody's performance very differently if they're spirited or if they show up indifferent. And I'll just give you a quick example, because the Straits Times actually covered a teacher a few years ago during this trend of quiet quitting. And the teacher said that she came to school every single day and put together these really exciting learning programs for their students. She even wrote them all individual hand cards. But one day she felt wronged by her supervisor. And she said, "So what's the point?" And she just gave up. And so that is a person that you can see that goes from that everyday spirit that moves to indifference. And so that's what we're capturing in these statistics.
And why then is that a strategic liability, not just for companies, but also for the economy at large?
Well, there's two things. I mean, one, it's the well-being of your employees. I mean, if somebody is actively disengaged, their daily well-being looks exactly like those that are unemployed. They are twice as likely to experience debilitating stress, debilitating worry, etc. But on the other side of the ledger, if you're just a sheer shareholder capitalist, this also has fundamental impacts on things like your profit returns or your attendance or your turnover. And so these have real hard metrics that are aligned with them as well.
Yeah, a particular group that was brought up in that report is younger employees. They were found to be less engaged. Is this an issue, you think, of younger workers having different expectations now? Or do you think the workplace is really not catching up to what they want from their jobs?
Well, the only challenge with that is that it shifts the burden or the problem to the worker when the real underlying issue is not employees, it's actually the workplace. So we did a global study and we asked people if they enjoy the work that they do. And we found overwhelmingly 80% of people say they enjoy the work that they do. People that are in healthcare love to provide healthcare. People that are a police officer loves to protect and serve. But at the end of the day, the reason that these numbers are so low, and not just in Singapore, but globally, like why are people actually broken at work? It's not work, it's the workplace. And that's the massive problem.
Yeah, if you were to zoom out a little bit and to look at the outcome and the impact of having workers very disengaged, despite loving, as you say, the job that they do, what is the impact on the economy?
Yeah, well, first of all, it breaks them. And what they do is they end up like this teacher where they don't start really bringing real innovation or entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship into some organizations. But the impact for Singapore alone, our estimates, is $60 billion a year.
Wow. Okay, that is a staggering number. I think now the employers are starting to listen, right? Also, managers were singled out as a group that is very crucial to making sure that, their workers are engaged. What do you think is lacking here? Do you think that managers are being trained to manage work more than they're being trained to manage people? What needs to change?
Well, we find that the single biggest cause to what these engagement numbers look like just comes down to one thing. It's the manager. 70% of the variance of all engagement across the board is just who your manager is. And ultimately, that comes down to a few things. I mean, one is there are some people who are built to be great managers and maybe some who aren't. The other thing is that we fundamentally don't train managers. We did a global study where we interviewed managers in 140 countries, and we said, have you ever been trained to be a manager? Less than half ever had formal training. And so a lot of times what you see is the result of what we call the Peter principle. If you were good at sales, if you're a good nurse, they ultimately say, just move them into being a boss. The problem with that is, though, is there are very structured things that you need to be good at in order to be an effective manager that they've never been told. And that is where there is a fundamental breakdown and which causes so much mass checking out and indifference that takes place across the workplace.
Okay, so then where should they start? As the company, the leader of the organization, for example, you highlighted 4 priorities in your report. There's management, there's culture, there is talent, and HR. Which is the most important? Where does the organization start?
You have to get it right with picking managers in the first place. I mean, one, and which is the most difficult, is pick people based on who really has that inherent talent to be a great manager. The second is you've got to give them the training and the tools in order to be an effective manager. That is all the way from the top, from culture, and all the way down to structural things like actually giving them that training. Once you put that in place, you can make remarkable changes. We've seen even in countries like Poland, for example, where 8% of the entire workforce is engaged. A lot of times people will just say, well, this is a cultural thing. Nobody's ever engaged at work here. There was actually a woman, a CHRO at a famous company named Jabka. She said that's not true. And she ran a program and took their engagement up past 70%, one of the highest in our database. So it is possible. And you just have to have the right leadership that says we not only are going to care about this, but we're going to measure it and we're going to manage around it.
And speaking of what employees care about, work-life balance, that's something that's really crucial here. A study by Randstad finds that 43% of respondents say that they would leave their current employer, their current job, if the work-life balance issue is not addressed and not aligned. Are the companies here adapting quickly enough to this need? And what more can be done in this light?
I don't know if they are adapting quickly enough, but I think what's concerning is where that trend is headed. Because we even observed this in the United States, far more people now are saying, yeah, I would also like to leave my job to find more work-life balance. But why are they saying that? The reason they're saying that goes right back to this central issue that the workplace is fundamentally broken. And this is something that we've said at Gallup for a long time, and maybe it's a bad joke, but we say that we are closer to colonizing Mars than we are to fixing the world's broken workplace.
Wow.
But until we get that right, all you're going to do is see more people look for solutions to say, how do I spend less time at work because it's so broken? And ultimately, it's crushing their well-being.
And hopefully this report is a sobering start for employers to start looking at
Amen.
these issues. Well, thank you so much, Jon, for coming in today
Thank you
and
for
sharing
having me.
more about the report with us. That was Jon Clifton, who is CEO of Gallup.